morning, everyone. Mario Blandini here. I am joined by Scott Lowe of many different fames, Wikibon, the 1610 group. I see him a lot on Tech Republic. Hey, good morning, Scott. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Mario. How are you?
I am awesome. And without further ado, we're just going to go ahead and launch some of these questions because we want to get some input on how our audience is comprised today. So as you'll see here, we have opened up a poll that asks you how many users are in your environment. So if you can take a couple seconds and fill that out, it'll give us an indication of who all is in the audience. Now, you talk to pretty much people of all sizes, right, Scott, in terms of when you blog and who you really do analysis for. Is that correct?
It is. I mean, I focus, I would say, on the more the SMB mid-market, but it certainly applies to the enterprise as well.
57% of folks here are actually fewer than 100, which is fantastic.
That is great.
But maybe you can give us some information, Scott, on the trends you're seeing. You just came out of VMworld, and you were at the Storage Developers Conference here very recently as well. What's the talk around server virtualization? Is it something that everybody's doing, even the small customers? Where is it in terms of what you're seeing?
I think that, virtualization has been obviously, and by the way, let me apologize in advance. I bit my tongue really hard, so I'm having a little trouble with my S's. But virtualization is good for everybody. And what we're starting to see, I think, is it's making its way more down market even than it had in the past. Now, that's not to say that the SMB space was not doing virtualization, but it's being done more and more these days. And if you were at the Storage Developers Conference, it was all about Hyper-V, believe it or not, and Microsoft's up-and-coming Server Message Block 3 or SMB3 protocol, which is basically a way to communicate between Hyper-V hosts and storage in a way that can be pretty powerful for an SMB or a mid-market company that doesn't want to have a lot of complexity in their virtual environment. So even if a smaller environment has not yet jumped significantly on the virtualization bandwagon, I definitely see a lot of opportunity for a simplistic way to do it coming down the pike. And you mentioned VMworld. VMworld was chock full of solutions for smaller companies that need to do virtualization. We have some of these one-stop shops that are up and coming that are pretty powerful from a virtualization standpoint. So the virtualization is certainly not a flash in the pan, as I actually heard it described by someone recently. I was sort of stunned, but it's definitely the most common method by which new workloads are deployed today.
And really, Scott, the reason why I reached out to you to do this particular analysis with us is that performance metrics around storage in a virtual environment are a little bit different than you might have with traditional measurements of storage. And a question that we have here, I'm going to try to get it up as soon as I can if GoToMeeting will be forgiving of me. It's how do you rank performance metrics in terms of order of importance? A lot of folks think pure throughput is the way you measure performance, and certainly that's one criteria and characteristic. Latency, a lot of people talk about the lowest of latency type of storage because that also provides a lot of value. Then you've got things like your network capacity. Price performance is always an important thing. And then that four-letter acronym, which is not necessarily a bad word, but it can be a challenge when it comes to storage. IOs per second, or IOPS. And in the invitation out to this live chat, I gave everybody a link to your blog that you did several years ago back in Tech Republic that broke that down. At the time, really, no one else was really looking at that. What caused you to write that blog? Was it the fact that so many people had questions, especially since it became a constraint in a virtual environment?
Yeah, that was the big driver. I mean, obviously, the blog is still one of the top 10 at Tech Republic every day, which I'm really surprised about. But it was basically a way to help people start to understand how storage performance actually works. Now, it's a relatively simplistic look because it assumes a single block size across the board. However, and that's not true in the real world. There's going to be different block sizes, and it's going to affect performance statistics in that way. But it helps people start to think about some of the factors that go into managing the workloads that are going to be present on the storage environment. And, you asked the question about what's the most important, throughput, is it IOPS, what is it? It's a little bit of everything. And any breakdown through the environment it's going to reflect in how those workloads operate. We look at the traditional metrics that people look at for virtualization, and we see people measuring, CPU, memory, storage performance, or storage capacity and performance. In a lot of virtual environments, memory is the first resource to break down, but a very close second, if not a first in a lot of places, is storage. And that can be capacity or that can be performance. And what I was really getting after in that blog posting was getting people thinking about something other than capacity when they buy storage. Because in a lot of folks I talked to, they were talking about terabytes and gigabytes, and there was no talk about megabits per second and IOPS. And those are incredibly important considerations when buying storage. If you buy storage without the right kind of capacity specifications, you're pretty well finished from a long-term perspective, because your users are going to be unhappy, you're going to be unhappy, and you're going to be throwing some good money at something that can't meet your needs potentially.
Right. I think that, Scott, that's one of the reasons why flash storage tends to be such a hot topic these days, because folks are looking to break past what was traditionally a limitation of hard disk drive technology. The data has to live somewhere, so you have to have storage in your architecture. And generally speaking, folks are looking at that. But let's go ahead and continue on with the questions and get some analysis from Scott around what these IOPS mean. The question I was going to ask next, Scott, is to meet I/O requirements for top applications, what do you think the best approach is? A classic approach might be to scale up storage, add more shelves of SAS drives to existing controllers, gives you more spindles, gives you more IOPS. That's one way to do it. Another thing to do would be to do a scale-out storage approach. A lot of technologies are that way, where you can add additional nodes containing more drives. Not only do you get more controller resource, but you also get more spindles that overall adds to that effect. Hybrid storage, I think, is an interesting one because it combines both hard drive and SSD, and there's technology around tiering that makes it interesting. You can buy all flash-based storage, too, without hard drives, if that's something that's possible. And there's also that old-fashioned pod architecture. If my unit of measure is a pair of servers and I have a storage device for it, if I buy another pair of servers, you could buy another storage device and kind of build it out pod style. Of all the things I just described, there's probably places for all of them, right? But thinking mostly about small and medium business, which represents the largest percentage of folks that are on this webcast, which approach do you think is the one that's really emerging for I/O requirements because virtualization's killing the storage?
I see probably of those choices two as being the most common. One is a scale-up type of architecture, although scale-out has its place, and obviously there's pros and cons to both. When you do a scale-up, you can often do so a little bit less expensively because you're not buying all the compute and all the network throughput that you would buy in a scale-out architecture. But again, that potentially becomes a limiting factor then as you add capacity, you're not adding more throughput capability on the network wire, although that's not generally where you're going to see your bottleneck. Scale-out's got its place, but you're going to see lots of throughput capability there, but you're going to pay more for it. What I see as a real potential for future of storage is the hybrid approach. SSDs alone, there's a lot of companies out there that are doing this. And if you went to VMworld, you got to see about 327 of them, maybe not that many, but it seemed like it. Companies that are doing all-flash kind of stuff. But they are incredibly expensive, and there's not a lot of SMBs that are going to want to drop $250,000 on all pure flash storage, unless they're doing something like major analytics, or they really got to do something that's I/O intensive, where price per IOP or dollar per IOP is the critical factor. I think most organizations are still after a balance of dollars per gigabyte and dollars per IOP when you're looking at the cost factors that go into storage. So, and from that perspective, I see hybrid storage as being a sweet spot for the foreseeable future, while the storage industry works on the next great thing. And at the same time, the cost for all storage is coming down. So over time, I think you'll start seeing a move away from, some rotational storage to more flash storage. But the cost is going to have to come down quite a bit for that to happen. And again, in the SMB space, you're going to see an equal emphasis on both capacity and performance. And these hybrid storage units with multi-terabyte drives, when backed with flash or fronted with flash, can provide basically what you need as far as capacity and throughput go for a number of different SMB requirements.
In terms of CPU capacity and RAM for cache of a storage solution, does it really make a difference in delivering enterprise-level storage? Thinking around things like deduplication, syncing, RAID performance, rebuildings, and so forth. In your experience, is one of the criteria that people should look for big CPU and RAM in their storage, or do they look for other characteristics from a research perspective?
Again, it's going to really depend on what their needs are. If you're going to start doing compression and deduplication and a number of other, I would say, higher end, not necessarily high end features you're going to expect out of your storage, you're going to have the CPU and the RAM that can support all of those needs. And then caching starts to be important when you start doing tiers as well, because you're going to need tiered storage, because you're going to have to cache some of that data that's going to go to slower disks somewhere in an interim period. So yes, I definitely see CPU and RAM as having a place in a storage array as you add more and more features to the storage arrays. What you don't want to do is have these features overwhelm the storage to a point where it can't meet its primary goal, which is to store data.
I agree with you there, because in the mainframe days, everything existed in the middle. We went to distributed computing, and you wanted to get stuff off servers because CPU and memory were a constraint. These days, CPU and memory tend to be fairly abundant in the virtual architecture. So some of those things could conceivably move back to the middle. In fact, one of the questions that we do have, which of the storage technologies built into server virtualization are you most interested in using? The reason for this question, Scott, is that some of that replication stuff is available not in the storage these days, but right there in the middle where you're already doing your administration and tied into orchestration. And I think whether it's VMware or Hyper-V or even Citrix, we're seeing that you got Storage vMotion, which has been there for a while, and the enterprise edition of VMware is now available in standard as of 5.1. You've got vSphere replication, which came out in vSphere 5. vSphere replication came out in vSphere 5 with SRM, and now in 5.1, it's built into Essentials Plus, basically their lowest license key at no extra charge, which is really cool. Hyper-V Replica, I'm sure you heard about that this week in terms of the Storage Developers Forum. That's not cost. There's no cost there. You got site recovery integrated into the Zen Server 6 platform. Heck, there's products like Veeam Backup and Replication, which if you're using it for backup, you can leverage those facilities in either Hyper-V or VMware to do replication. That's not going to be happening on your storage. It's going to be happening, using the virtual resources, whether a virtual appliance or if you want to go for a physical server. I think most people go virtual appliance. Which of these storage technologies do you think are most interesting, and why?
Anything that provides an abstraction capability to me, basically abstracting some of the data or the compute away from hardware, is interesting to me. So I see basically any of the vMotion type technologies as being critically important from a workload management and availability perspective. I think these have been the reason we all went to virtualization were a lot of some of these workload migration and workload abstraction features that are available. Anything we can do to make that easier and better is good. And I was happy to see VMware start to add some of these capabilities into the lower tier bundles for vSphere. And again, I think a lot of this was an answer to Microsoft, to be perfectly honest, who makes a lot of these enterprise features available in their free Hyper-V. So there's partially a response by VMware to that potential threat from Microsoft. And I think Microsoft is going to have a pretty good story to tell because of things like Hyper-V Replica and the fact that they've got, again, these very important workload abstraction features built into the base product that's available at no charge. So
are we seeing a trend here, Scott, where the idea of selecting your storage based on it having all of the stuff built in, replication, deduplication, snapshots, compression, encryption, all that sort of other stuff, are we seeing because of virtualization and this change in the way we're doing compute, some of those functions moving back closer toward the middle, because it seems like if you're able to get them for free, not only can you have some cost savings there, but you're also getting some management efficiencies, because if you're spending your day administering your virtual environment, you're not really messing around with the hardware devices. You like working there, managing and orchestrating your applications. That's how you get your uptime going. Is this a trend or is it a fad?
I think it's probably a trend, but it's not going to be for everybody. I mean, if you're looking at an enterprise, I don't think they're going to be uncomfortable managing these features at the storage level. I think as you start to move down market, and that's not to say that they don't have the same needs, but they're going to have to address them in different ways. You know, a lot of, I would say, these probably sub 100 SMBs employees aren't going to have a team of dedicated people for storage. So by putting it into the hypervisor management layer, it's one less training point. It's one less point of having to figure out what's going on in the environment. So I think it's important for those folks to have this capability built into the hypervisor management layer.
I have one more question for you around the biggest challenge when it comes to offsite backup or DR. As a former IT guy myself, I had 18 data centers worldwide. I was very much a tape backup and restore type of guy when it came to my RTOs and RPOs. These days, most people aren't satisfied with that level of service. They really do want something that's off-site, but much more responsive, better RTO, RPO. So when it comes to the biggest challenges there from an SMB perspective, I'm going to throw some of the top ones out. Maybe you can just tell us what you think the ones that rise to the top are. One would be that you have to have matching storage that's usually fairly high cost at both sites in order to do disk-based replication, true disk-based replication. There's the overall recovery and orchestration runbook management and effort. The more parts you have and the more the operations are distributed across different hardware platforms certainly makes that a challenge. And I know my runbook used to be hundreds of pages long on how to do recoveries. There's limited bandwidth, and I think that's can be a concern for some smaller organizations because you can't buy a big enough pipe to be able to shove all the stuff through it. Budget overall just for a second site. Certainly cloud providers can offer you maybe that second site as your recovery site. And then just, hey, the time to work on all of it. This stuff takes time to go and get it set up. They probably all have a factor into what makes it hard for a smaller organization to do offsite backup or DR. What do you think some of the real long poles are in the tent to get a project like that going in a small organization?
Again, I think you hit a couple of those. The tough things are going to be bandwidth, and it's going to be the cost. And I think this is going to be an area where the public cloud actually eventually does start playing a role. There are some technologies that are coming down the pike that will basically make the public cloud get just another tier of the data center.
Yep.
And I think that's part of the people hear cloud. A lot of people hear cloud, and all of a sudden they hear, "Well, I'm going to lose my job." Well, I don't think that's necessarily the case. But if you make it another tier of the data center, it's basically going to be easily integrated. There's not going to be the massive integration need that I think there's a lot of concern around right now. I see that as really the long-term approach to a lot of this stuff. But I do believe that tape still is going to have a place for quite some time from just a pure archival perspective.
For sure, there's a great way to use tape. I think a lot of folks, we see it at Drobo. This webcast isn't about Drobo, but just something from Drobo users. A lot of them are using high-capacity disks in a way that can still get them the economics they're looking for, but they love the idea that it's random access restore and the fact that they can have the system up, but in the drive spun down. If they need to access it, it's a matter of just seeking out there, finding it, the drive spin up in 30 seconds, and they're now streaming back what they need. So they like that kind of aspect of it. But that being said, we at Drobo still have some tapes. we could buy as much storage as we want. We're a small business, fewer than 100 employees here, and we do have a fairly extensive data protection practice that hasn't excluded tape 100%. So we'd agree with you there that that's still in the mix too.
Mario, I realize this is not a Drobo call, but I think people should actually look at players like Drobo from this perspective as well, because you guys have, from a capacity perspective, a really important story to tell. I mean, you can go up to 30 terabytes, right, in a B800.
Yeah.
And when you start coupling that with some of the other plays you guys have as far as being able to put SSD in to some of those things to make them a little bit faster, the cost per gigabyte there is pretty low, and you guys have a pretty good story to tell. So.
Yeah. And so for us, the way we see the market going for folks, interested in the Drobo perspective, the fun part of my job is talking about this stuff with end user customers and with the integrators that put solutions together for small business. They're excited that there's new building blocks around low-cost virtualization like VMware Essentials Plus. There's the ability to use deduplication, which is also now, as of 5.1, free up to 2 terabytes in VMware. How cool is that? Or all the data protection software that they might be considering, where they're already using Acronis, Veeam, Symantec, something like that. Deduplication's built in, and it helps them not only make more efficient use of that low-cost storage, i.e. bumping up the price capacity advantage. It also makes it more easy to put it across that pipe that you talked about for a smaller organization, because the amount of bandwidth is a concern. So the less you have to transfer over makes a whole lot of sense. Last question for you, Scott. You can't have a survey without cloud, right? So what really is the thinking around public cloud versus on-premises storage? If folks are seriously considering using public cloud as a tier of storage, what tier do they use it for over the next 12 months? Certainly in the future, we're going to have biological computing where you can, throw in, organic matter and it'll create itself into a computer, right? That's super far reaching. Over the next 12 months, let me throw a couple scenarios out and you tell me kind of where it reaches the barometer. Some people may already have no on-premises IT. Everything may be in the cloud with the exception of desktops, laptops, PDAs, tablets, phones, right? That's one extreme. On the other extreme, someone could say public cloud's just not for me. The public cloud storage aspect is just not a fit for their organization. In the middle, you can use it for a local cache and maybe use a cloud gateway to everything in the cloud, kind of like the Amazon S3 AWS storage gateway. You can have a full solution for offsite backup and primary production remains on premises. This could be, there's a lot of offsite backup solutions for cloud backup. Or maybe it's just, over the next 12 months, an additional backup copy of select data for extra protection in the cloud. Kind of like from a tiering solution, you may not do your entire backup set into the cloud, but certainly the most important stuff, it makes sense to put it there. So in that kind of continuum, where do you see the SMB type of person looking most over the next 12 months?
I'd like to just make sure we break down SMB in two ways before I answer, because I see SMB is obviously small, medium business, but when we're talking, 1 to 5 employees, I think that's a different story than you're talking about a SMB, what you would think about as a sort of a small enterprise. If you're talking about those super small SMBs, I think that a lot of them are going to be comfortable using cloud and using services like, Crash Plan and things like that for backup of PCs and making sure that they are able to recover from a disaster if a PC breaks or something, they have a fire or something. When you start looking at the small enterprise, a super small enterprise, I don't see them using cloud for primary storage. I really see them using cloud, if for anything, as an additional copy of selected data for protection. In fact, I'm working with a client right now in my consulting practice on this very issue. They want to take selected data. They don't want to do everything because of cost and bandwidth restrictions. Just selected critical data and have a second copy of it in the cloud. They use Veeam for their primary backup, and then as another layer of backup, we're working on getting this additional cloud-based protection put in place.
Yeah, if you were to ask me my own personal opinion, I'd say it's definitely there for the majority of folks as well, because you'd think that a storage provider like Drobo would be very much anti-cloud. But the truth is, there is a great benefit, even for small organizations, because not everybody has a reliable offsite backup location for their Tier 1 stuff. So they can get a good level of service out of that. And because it's not the entire data set, it may be practical for them to afford the cost of the cloud storage. I know that you can get 50 gigs for free, but for a lot of organizations, 50 gigs isn't enough to really store all their backup data, but it might be some for their select, and there's some good plans out there that offer a little bit more data, but just the size of the pipe makes it impractical, at least these days, to store terabytes upon terabytes in the cloud. So yeah, I'd say that it's definitely there. Overall, though, you're a fan of the cloud, Scott?
I am. I mean, if it's used, again, I like the Spider-Man phrase, with great power comes great responsibility. I think it's too easy to say we're just going to throw this in the cloud and be done with it. But otherwise, I am a fan of the cloud if it's used appropriately, and not just used sort of haphazardly by whoever and whenever. I fall back on some reasonable IT governance practices that need to be put in place for cloud to be considered as a viable option.
All right, hey, Scott, I really appreciate you spending some time with us today to go through a live chat, and we have tons of questions outside of my prepared stuff. If you got a couple minutes, maybe we'll take it into bonus time here and hit you with some of these things, which is fantastic. Do you see the idea of servers going away 100%? I guess that's kind of the idea here. Maybe you don't need servers and you have like an all-in-one box that's a storage box. That architecture kind of exists today in some of those storage systems. Maybe you can talk about what you see the architecture for storage being. Do you see that the hardware case that holds the hard drives being a separate entity than the server that holds the processor and memory for your apps?
I saw some things at Storage Developers Conference this week that were kind of got to this, and also I think you alluded to some of the all-in-one plays, like from Nutanix and Pivot 3 and SimpliVity that we saw at VMworld as well. Yep. Where basically these are devices that are units of infrastructure. You have disk, compute, and processor, RAM, and the hypervisor all built into a box, and you just throw that in the data center and call it a day. And that is the server. That is the host on which you're going to place your virtual machines. You don't need to buy any separate storage. All the storage is built into the box. And if you look at something like Nutanix, they're using a Fusion I/O card for massive performance. So there's sort of these ways to simplify the overall environment. Now, Microsoft's not going to get left out of this as well. And again, I mentioned that at Storage Developers Conference this week, there was a lot of talk around Hyper-V and SMB3. And there are players that are working on building the same thing out for Hyper-V. And again, there you will not have to pay for the hypervisor itself, so there could be some potential cost benefit there, and I think you're going to see some of those things targeted at the SMB space.
Super. Some of the Pivot 3, Nutanix stuff, it's fairly decent size, though. Is there really an SMB variant these days, or is it starting out more for the cloud provider or the larger organization that can really drive economics through scale?
Yeah, and that's the kicker. I mean, to buy into one of those options, you're going to get a really simple environment right now, but they're starting out well into the 5 figures. Yeah. To buy enough of the units in order to be able to have high availability and failover and all this stuff that a lot of organizations are going to want. Again, what I saw at the Storage Developers Conference this week was basically a Hyper-V / SMB-based approach to the problem, which I think is going to come in at much lower cost and be much more attractive to the SMB than you're going to see from some of the other players.
VMware ESXi 5.1, it seems really exciting to be able to run on Mac hardware, virtualizing Mac servers in an SMB. Mm-hmm. Do you have any comments on Mac support, and how often do people ask you about that? Because a lot of small organizations do like Mac because it's user-friendly, or their business may be more media creation-oriented, where Macs have some pretty good applications. What's your overall position on Mac in terms of SMB IT?
A few years ago, frankly, my thinking has changed significantly. I'm actually willing to say I probably made a mistake a few years ago. We actively avoided supporting Macs unless we had to. But that was, again, quite a few years ago. Now, to tell you how far I've come, I'm dialed into one part of this from my iPhone while I'm on the web part of it with my MacBook Pro Retina. I've become, and again, it's because of the hardware. It's not necessarily the software. I just want hardware that just freaking works. And this gives me that that capability.
Yeah.
So I do believe that there is most certainly a place for Macs. And the beauty of the thing is, if you really want to use a Mac because it's just the right hardware for you, or there's something that you're a design professional, there's lots of solutions out there that'll let you run Windows on your Mac. If you need to fall back to Windows, you can get Parallels, you can get VMware Fusion, you can get Oracle VirtualBox. I'm sure there's others. Or you can just use Boot Camp. And I have VMware Fusion on my Mac. I run about 10 Windows virtual machines for various purposes. So I don't lose anything by having moved to a Mac.
Cool. Drobo, while we make products for SMB IT folks, and the majority of our business is in that area, we have our smaller boxes, which people love for home, and the creative folks really love them. It's as easy as following a traffic signal to manage Drobo. And for an iSCSI SAN perspective, we make using a Mac about as easy as you possibly could, with the Atto iSCSI initiator built into our Drobo dashboard software, single checkbox mounting of iSCSI volumes over the network, super simple. And we do see a lot of folks, an unnecessarily large, or I shouldn't say unusually large percentage compared to the industry norm of folks using Macs and SMB IT. So we also have supporters, and anyone who's seen my laptop at a trade show knows that I'm not using the Apple logo in an authorized way. I've got the DR and then the BO on each side of the Apple logo, which is a fun little visual. Hey, guys, we're going to continue on with some time. You have a couple more minutes, Scott? Because the questions keep coming. Super. All right. This one wins the award from Trevor as the longest question asked so far. So I'm just going to read it verbatim. How do you feel that the ever-increasing size of drives, without much in the way of increased drive speed, is affecting the risk of modern storage? The question specifically related to the idea that we have reached the end of what RAID 5 can do with the introduction of 3 terabyte drives. Hey, rebuilds, they stress your system. They raise the risk of a second drive failing during long rebuilds. So drive size is there. What's the barrier that we must move to when you think about RAID 6, or as Drobo would call it, dual disk redundancy, something we support as well. You can choose between single or dual, or classic RAID 5, RAID 6. Do you feel Flash is likely to be subject to the same rebuild stress issues? So it's a two-part question. When do you go from RAID 5 to RAID 6? Is it a size thing, or is it really a importance of the data thing? And secondarily, how does that same question apply to Flash?
Okay. For the first part of the question, on the size, yes, we're far beyond with these 3 terabyte drives, where I'll be comfortable running them in a RAID 5 environment. And it has to do, for me, with drive size. You run the risk of not just a second drive failure, because it takes so darn long for a rebuild, but of running across basically an unrecoverable read error. Drives don't run forever. And even if everything looks like it's running fine, when you hit a rebuild point, there comes a time when you could run into the URE. And if you go to Google and type unrecoverable read error, you'll get lots and lots of stuff back, including a site that says, never use RAID 5 for production for anything. Personally, I think anything beyond a terabyte doesn't do RAID 5. Now, that might even be too aggressive for some, because RAID 5 does still have, I know I'm going to get ripped apart for saying this, but it does still have a place in some organizations. I should point out that the other Scott Lowe, the gentleman that works for EMC and writes the vSphere books, is right now involved in a pretty significant debate on the Spiceworks forum over just this issue about RAID 5 versus RAID 6 versus RAID 10. I don't think RAID 6 is necessarily the answer either, because to the RAID 5 question, simply because you introduce a further hit when it comes to write speed, or to IOPS, particularly with write. So you basically add overhead beyond capacity. You basically take a performance hit to move to RAID 6 that you may not have accounted for when you initially put your storage layer in.
Right.
So I think the answer in a lot of, if your choice is between RAID 5 and RAID 6, consider RAID 10 unless RAID 6, unless you're just doing from a pure, it's all about capacity. It's just going to be a file server that's not going to get hit a lot.
Yeah. Well, I want to jump in there, Scott, real quick, in terms of this, the whole hard drive thing. A lot of people ask, hey, Drobo, what kind of RAID do you guys do? And the answer is we do beyond RAID. It's a little bit different. We do a combination of striping with parity and mirroring, depending on the drives that you throw in there. Everything's a common storage pool, and you can choose either single or dual disk protection, kind of like RAID 5 or RAID 6. We do have 4 terabyte drives out there, so people are using those when they want the capacity. We do data scrubbing and a lot of the other advanced techniques that you might expect to make sure that we're preventing some of those read error type situations, Scott, that you mentioned. So that's kind of a cool thing that you want to have in there. Not built into a lot of classic RAID controllers, but in the more modern systems, you'll find more of that. And as well, from a Drobo perspective, we built into the box, understanding this dynamic with our B1200i, the hardware to do the dual disk redundancy, double parity, without any hit on the performance. Because we knew that people would really want to do that. Folks who buy Drobos want massive capacity. That's just kind of what they want. So that's how we've kind of built the product. And I think that from a hybrid storage perspective, which is kind of like a segue to the second part of the question, Scott, around flash, if you truly do have a hybrid solution where you're going to need IOPS, it's probably not going to be on your RAID 6 anyway. Your IOPS data that needs high IOPS is probably going to reside in a tiering solution on flash. So that's certainly what Drobo's doing with our technology. Do you think that some of the size of drive things and RAID levels is going to impact flash? How would you answer that same question from a flash perspective?
I don't think you're necessarily going to see the same thing at flash. I mean, flash has got its own set of challenges, although a lot of them are being solved through things like wear leveling and other techniques. I mean, if you look at a cell of flash, it can only survive so many write erase cycles before it's basically dead. But again, through techniques such as wear leveling, which is basically saying, well, we're not going to continue to beat the same cell over and over, you're able to get lots of life out of your flash drives. Now, again, who knows what's going to happen when you have a rebuild situation on a flash drive? It could suffer a fault at that point where you have a double disk fault, but I don't think it's quite the same situation as you hit with the RAID 5. And to Mario's point, yes, a lot of modern domain controllers, RAID controllers, will take into account some of these URE type issues and find ways to work around the potential for an unrecoverable read error. That said, I'm not a big fan of RAID 5 for huge drives.
Right. Well, I think it sort of makes sense. I think the question hit it right on the head, which is why I wanted to go ahead and ask that, not only to award the longest question of the webcast to Trevor, but also because I thought it was a good one. And if any of you guys have some specific questions for Scott, I'm sure you don't mind me forwarding them to you by email, Scott. We can continue the discussion there. I'd also want to point out that whether you're following Scott on Twitter, whether you check him out on Wikibon, whether you go out to Tech Republic and read the blogs he does on a weekly basis, I'd be really appreciative if you took some time out to go follow Scott there, because he's one of the top guys I follow out there to figure out what the heck's going on, because you're a hands-on guy. I won't suck up to you too much, but I think you do a great job, Scott, so I appreciate you taking time to spend time with us. Another question that we have here, see SSDs becoming more common in NAS storage. I focused most of the discussion here on iSCSI-based SAN storage, but from a file server perspective, do you jam SSDs into your file server? Is there a benefit in a file server workload to having the SSDs in there?
Yeah, I definitely don't see much difference between your normal type block level iSCSI fiber channel based storage and NAS, because a NAS device can be using NFS or SMB3, and to have that capability to basically have, and again, I think that you're going to see this most useful in a hybrid type situation where basically it's transparent that the SSD is there, and the fact that those IOPS will lift the whole performance of the whole array to a higher level. I think it applies equally for those kind of file-based workloads, which just don't have to be Windows files. Again, it could be your virtual machine stored via NFS, it could be virtual machine stored over SMB3, what have you. I definitely see a benefit there.
Cool. Hey, thanks for taking that. And folks, we're going to start bringing it in for a landing here in a second. So what turned out to be scheduled 30 minutes has gone into overtime with some great questions from you. One of the last questions would be, about public cloud around security requirements. I didn't really ask my question at all vis-a-vis security. It was just straight up around some of the technical and logistic limitations. Since you do a lot of CIO consulting in the small business, what's the current feeling in the smaller organizations around security and government sort of stuff? Large organizations have lawyers, they can figure that sort of stuff out. Smaller organizations don't. Who has access to the encryption keys if it's encrypted? What's the deal with cloud storage there, and is that enough to get you to not look at it?
For some, yes, it is. I mean, there's a lot of questions around that. Yes, there are zero standards in place for this kind of thing, so it makes it also harder to move between providers. There's a sense of lock-in, when you move to a particular provider. And frankly, I don't have good guidance on that at this point. The folks that I'm working with are using cloud for relatively light applications right now. Nothing certainly that would be considered, government grade or NSA grade security needs. So unfortunately, I know where I'm not strong in an answer, and I don't want to provide bad guidance. So it's not something I can really speak to yet.
All right, cool. Hey, of course, everyone always wants to ask, what's your favorite? I know you're a fairly neutral guy, Scott. So just let's say coming out of VMworld and coming out of Storage Developers Forum, from a backup software perspective, I know the folks that are part of the Tech Field Day, are Veeam supporters, but there's a lot of other great applications out there. Who would you say your top 5 are in no particular order of the backup softwares out there from an SMB perspective that people should consider on their short list?
Let's say that Veeam is definitely one that I've kind of fallen in love with. I mean, it's a huge. They're a great play these days. Mm-hmm. If you're an all Microsoft shop, and again, people laugh at me when I tell them this, but it's the truth. Believe it or not, Microsoft Data Protection Manager is absolutely fantastic.
Me too, man. Hey, the funny thing is, why do people think you're weird when you say that? We have a solution guide on our website that talks about how to get it set up. With 2012, it got even better.
Yeah, it used to suck. Don't get me wrong. But starting with really 2007, 2010, it became really good. I actually did a training course on DPM for Train Signal, and I didn't know a lot about it. I learned it, did the course, and then implemented it at my job. It was like, holy crap, this is awesome. And with 2012, it's gotten better. I mean, in recent versions, they've added support with tape. There's vendors out there that will seamlessly integrate it with a cloud storage for backup. So, I mean, it's great for Microsoft workloads. Don't get me wrong. It's not going to be great for, necessarily everybody and everything. And if you want to back up just Exchange, go get something else because Exchange support is terrible. But for other needs, it's fantastic. So, those are two that I highly recommend. Obviously, we have Semantic Backup Exec, which has recently undergone significant transformation. Apashore was another one that I used to have high on my radar. Mm-hmm. But I've had some discussions with folks recently about, after Dell's acquisition of the company, some potential issues there. So I'm not sure until Dell actually figures out what they're going to do with Apashore that I'd recommend it. So that's 4. There's lots of players out there.
Great. Well, again, thanks everybody for entering in all the questions. I have a ton more, but we're going to go ahead and try to motion it up. Of course, you can't answer a backup question without also opening it up to the Mac audience. So you talked about having a Mac. Are you just a straight time machine guy for your personal stuff? From a business perspective, do you look at things like Chronosync? Do you look at things like ArcAware? What type of backup application do you think would be used on a Mac environment?
For my personal use, I do Time Machine, but I also do Crash Plan.
Yeah, and that's another one. We also have a how-to guide on Drobo's website on how to use Crash Plan. I love their social backup feature. It sounds cool, right? Because it's got the word social in it. What's great about it is most people can't back up lots of stuff because it costs too much money. But if you have a friend or a family or someone you just buy a storage device for, as long as they connect it to a computer and they configure Crash Plan, you can use that for offsite backup. And we see a lot of Drobo users doing exactly that because they love to be able to do other sort of things. They just can't because it costs too much. Here is something that's essentially free, and they can do as much as they want. So it's really what all Americans love, all you can eat for free. if configured properly. So I'm a crash plan user myself. I've got at the in-laws house that's about 2 hours drive away from us and outside the disaster area. All the family photos, videos, and documents are crash planned out there. Are you doing the same thing? How far away are you crash planning, Scott?
Right to crash plan.
Oh, so you're using cloud too. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I do recommend them as a solution because, like a Drobo, easy and gives you lots of stuff for a low cost, which is great. Hey, if I were to have given you all these accolades earlier, Scott, it probably would have been harder to do the discussion, but tons of people chiming in saying that they really love the IOPS article and how it really helped them tremendously. So lots of thanks out there. It figures that it's a top 10 article still, even this day, over 2 years later. I think it's as fresh today, if not fresher. Are you going to update it for SSDs? That's the question.
At some point down the line, yes. Right now, I have commitments that's going to take a ton of research, and I have commitments that are just killing me. So it'll be sometime, but not right away. All
right. So the to-do list certainly is very, very full. Got it.
It is, but in a good way. I mean, I'm less than a year out, fully independent. I'm happy to have a to-do list, but I can't keep up with.
Scott, thanks very much for taking some time to be with us today. We really appreciate it.
Very happy to be here, and I love answering questions. So.
All right. So, hey, folks, go check out Scott. If you want even more access to him, I'm sure that he loves getting notifications that you're commenting to his articles on Wikibon, Tech Republic, and all over the Internet. So we're glad to have given you a very direct access to Scott. If you want to follow him on Twitter, it's at Other Scott Lowe. Did I get that correct, Scott?
You did.
At Other Scott Lowe. And the funny thing is, I only think of you when I think of Scott Lowe, but you're right. You've got yourself as the other guy. Go figure. There's not too many Mario Blandinis out there. I think people know who I am.
That's what, and the other Scott Lowe and I are very friendly. That's why I chose Other rather than Real or The or something like that.
That's true. Hey, that's cool. And who says that technology has to be winners and losers everywhere and everything's one versus the other? It's an ecosystem. It's a solution. It all works together, which is really fantastic. Hey, thanks again, Scott. We appreciate your expertise in today's session.
Thanks.
All right, that wraps up today's session. Thanks, everybody, for joining. Do take a chance to fill out that survey. When it comes due, we'll be posting a recording of today's session on our website for anybody who wants to go get access to that. Thanks again on behalf of Drobo. I want to thank Scott for his participation and thank everybody for your participation, not just live here, but in filling out our survey. Very much appreciated, folks. Have a great day.